With 278 days until the next election, protesters are winning tonight, and Donald Trump continued his retreat today with new polls, including a Fox poll, showing the country has completely turned against Donald Trump's invasion of Minneapolis. The biggest change in the polls is the number of Republicans who have dramatically increased in opposing Donald Trump's invasion of Minneapolis. The polls show Donald Trump has gone too far in his cruelty all over the country, including in Maine, where the state's Republican senator publicly announced Donald Trump's retreat today because she needs Donald Trump to retreat for her to have any hope of winning re-election in the state of Maine this year. Here is the sound of Donald Trump himself in retreat today.
Hopefully we won't have a shutdown. We're working on that right now. I think we're getting close. The Democrats, I don't believe, want to see it either. So we'll work in a very bipartisan way, I believe, not to have a shutdown.
When has Donald Trump ever sounded like that at the threat of a shutdown? Senate Democrats were ready to shut down the government over the funding of Donald Trump's invasion forces, and Donald Trump caved. Donald Trump caved to Chuck Schumer. Chuck Schumer announced that the Senate Democrats would shut down the government over this. And Donald Trump said, "Oh, let's talk. How can we avoid this?" The Republican Senate leader caved right along with Donald Trump. They are in retreat. And so Democrats in the Senate will allow other funding bills to go forward, but not the funding for Donald Trump's invasion forces in Minneapolis who murdered Renee Good and Alex Preddy. And we are all witnesses now. We have all seen the video. We're all witnesses to that video that showed what happened to those people at the hands of those federal agents. And we can all see as witnesses that it was murder. When the United States government retreats, it never uses the word retreat. In Vietnam, the generals and the Republican president called it de-escalation. That's the word that Donald Trump used this week about Minneapolis, de-escalate. Donald Trump learned that word during the end of the Vietnam War. Donald Trump's so-called border czar used the language of the American Vietnam retreat today when he talked about what the generals in Vietnam used to call the drawdown.
We are not surrendering our mission at all. We're just doing it smarter. We can draw down those resources. But based on the discussions I've had with the governor and the AG, we can start drawing down those resources. So the drawdown is going to happen based on these agreements. The agreements to have a loan is going to cause a significant drawdown. So you're going to see a drawdown. My main focus now is drawdown.
Sounds like an American general in Vietnam. The American government never uses the word retreat, never uses the word surrender, except to deny that they're doing it when they are doing it. That is how de-escalate entered our military language in Vietnam. That is how drawdown entered our military language in Vietnam when we were on our way to mounting a full retreat and a total surrender. In the first war the United States of America lost outright and never admitted losing, the anti-war protesters won. The protesters against the war in Vietnam won, and they forced America to leave Vietnam. That is the story of that de-escalation and that drawdown. And the protesters are winning tonight. For Tom Homan, of all people, to be able to stand in front of reporters for 15 minutes today without a single question being asked about the undercover FBI video of him accepting $50,000 in cash from undercover FBI agents in 2024. 2 people had to die. Tom Homan is the only person in the history of federal government employment to be offered a job in the federal government by the president after FBI undercover agents recorded him on video accepting $50,000 in cash in an undercover investigation of Tom Homan, who, of course, says he did nothing wrong. Those reporters today have never before in their lives been in the presence of a federal government employee who was caught on an FBI undercover video by FBI undercover agents accepting $50,000 in cash from those agents. And those reporters, understandably, within the time they had, did not ask him a single question about the $50,000, because the more important issue of murder of American citizens by the American government on the streets of Minneapolis was what brought Tom Homan to Minneapolis, where he was welcomed by the governor and the mayor as a relief from the deadly, dangerous, and incompetent people who have been in charge of Donald Trump's invasion forces in Minneapolis. Yes, Tom Homan is a more reasonable person to deal with than the unalterably evil, lying Stephen Miller, because anyone is better than Stephen Miller. Yes, Tom Homan is a better person to deal with than the incompetent, clownish, and lying Kristi Noem, who was silenced by Donald Trump in his phony TV cabinet meeting today. She was not allowed to speak. She was humiliated and silenced in that room. Attorney General Pamela Bondi was also not allowed to speak in that room today after she had just returned from Minneapolis, where she was also not allowed to speak publicly when she was in Minneapolis. All of this is happening because Donald Trump knows he has to retreat. It's happening because the protesters are winning. Donald Trump knows every day he keeps his invasion forces in the state of Maine makes it impossible for Republican Senator Susan Collins to get reelected there. And so Donald Trump is retreating from Maine. He's getting the troops out of there. Donald Trump knows that he is losing Republican voter support now on an issue where he always had their support, because he has turned his invasion forces into masked, cowardly agents of death. And so Donald Trump is doing, and Tom Homan is doing, what the protesters in Minneapolis have been telling them to do: de-escalate, draw down, retreat, get out of Minneapolis. The protesters are winning. Donald Trump is losing, and Tom Homan has been sent to Minneapolis to manage the retreat while never calling it a retreat. And Donald Trump is very easily and quickly reaching bipartisan agreements with Senate Democrats to avoid a government shutdown over the funding of Donald Trump's murderous invasion forces. The protesters did all of that. The protesters have already achieved more than it seemed possible they could achieve just last week, and they have achieved it faster than it seemed possible. And the protesters have even won the hearts and minds of some Republicans who are turning against Donald Trump in the polls on this issue. Donald Trump is losing, and the protesters are winning. The protesters have silenced Stephen Miller's poison and hatred. That's not Stephen Miller's choice. You know he wants to be on social media calling the protesters terrorists. You know he wants to be on TV screaming and continuing to call all of the protesters domestic terrorists. He wants to call the people who were murdered domestic terrorists, but Donald Trump will not let him do that. Donald Trump allowed none of his pretend tough talkers to go on social media or go on TV to continue to lie about the two people Donald Trump's invasion forces murdered in Minneapolis, Renee Good and Alex Preddy. Donald Trump took away the social media privileges of the now disgraced commander of his invasion forces in Minneapolis, Gregory Bavino, who is now lost in America somewhere. He used to be on television every day, making sure he wasn't wearing his mask in Minneapolis as he was throwing gas at protesters, peaceful protesters, so his face would be recognizable, so he could cash in on a nice right-wing media contract after he left federal employment. But now Donald Trump doesn't want the invasion force commander who said to Alex Preddy, quote, wanted to massacre law enforcement to be seen by anyone, anywhere. When Donald Trump decided to pull Agent Bavino out of Minneapolis, he called him, quote, kind of out there guy, a kind of out there guy. And that's the last thing Donald Trump said about Bavino. Imagine what it's like to be the viciously reflexive, hateful Stephen Miller or Greg Bavino ordered by Donald Trump not to touch their little social media toys to spew poison and lying hatred about the people murdered by federal agents in Minneapolis. Imagine how their fingers twitch as they look at their phones, craving a chance to spew more poison and hatred on their social media accounts about those victims, those murdered victims. But Donald Trump is in retreat, and they have been ordered to not say a word about those victims, not another word.